science, quantum numbers, identity, chemistry bond, faith. This show is called Global Educators, and this is an intersection for parents, teachers, and teenagers. Welcome, I'm your host, Byka. So this episode is about science and the importance of STEM education. Elizabeth is a dynamic, creative, skillful research scientist and science mentor. Thank you, Elizabeth. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. So I'm a PhD chemist by training. I obtained my PhD from The Ohio State University right when COVID hit. And as you know, that affected the education market, especially in the United States, quite a bit because students couldn't go to class. I'm really passionate about science education, especially at the high school and college level. I love working with those students. I provide tutoring, mentorship, can do career coaching in the sciences. So if you're looking for any of that, you can find me for any of that. And I'm just happy to be on the show today.
I'm excited. I think I'm going to be learning a lot. First part is about quantum numbers and you. I want to hear more about how you use this to teach students and the younger audience or the next generation about it's not just physics. Everything is correlated with Christ, and everything is correlated with God and our belief, our faith. Right? So what is this particular chapter book? Oh, by the way, what's the name of your book and what is this particular chapter about?
So this is a preview of my book. The book is launching very soon, not yet. To be launched January 15th. I'm just giving you a preview of it. This particular chapter is one of my favorites because we know as physicists and chemists that quantum numbers tell us a lot about electrons and atoms and where they're spatially located, or rather the probability of where they could be. And so there's 4 quantum numbers. The principal quantum number tells us about the energy level of that particular orbital, and L tells us about the shape. So there's different shapes. Some are spherical, some are like a dumbbell, the p orbitals you might remember from chemistry. And then there's also D and F orbitals, but they have different shapes, right? And look different in 3D. And then ML tells you which one is, and I'm not going to go into the nitty gritty with it, but the core concept I'm trying to communicate with the chapter is that no 2 electrons in the same atom have the same 4 quantum numbers. And likewise, every person on this earth has a unique gift, a unique calling, and a unique purpose. There's a common purpose that we have to glorify God, but as each individual you are special. You are fearfully and wonderfully made. Okay? So I want you to know that God loves you and that he created you from before the foundations of the earth. And that you have special giftings and you are in a different location and you are around different people than anyone else in the entire world, and that you are so, so special to God. And so that's the main thing I wanted to communicate with the quantum numbers, just as no 2 electrons in the same atom have the same 4 numbers. None of us are exactly the same.
And we recently had an episode about finding your purpose. I think it's difficult for a lot of people to, find their purpose. So if you're listening, don't try to be like anyone else. Everyone is unique. You have a special calling. So I think that message is by itself really powerful. And the next part is divine equilibrium.
So equilibrium in chemistry is when you have a reaction that can go both in the forward and the reverse direction, and there is a balance amount of the products and reactants. They're not necessarily the same amount of products and reactants, but if the reaction shifts one way too much, the reaction will shift back the other way until an equilibrium is established. And so that's kind of the core chemistry idea there. There's some reactions that are also irreversible, meaning that once the products form, you cannot go back to the reactants. And so in this particular chapter, I talk about how we have one life. Each of us have one life. And, um, like sometimes things can look like they're going one way. I parallel it with the story of Joseph in the Old Testament in the Bible, how a lot of bad things happened to him. He had these great dreams from God and shared them with his brothers, and his brothers didn't like him. He was sold into slavery and all these horrible things, right, over a period of time. But he still had faith and he still looked at the positive side of things. And that very jail cell that he was in was where God used to promote him to second in Egypt. And so overnight, he went from being in a jail cell, things happened to him that were pretty bad. He got thrown in a pit, sold into slavery, and just a bunch of things, none of us want to experience. But in that prison is actually where God fulfilled the dream he'd given him 13 years before.
The next section is about threefold cord. If you want to know, stick around.
Yes. So another chapter in my new book talks about chemistry bonds. And all of us, especially when you're joined to Christ, you have a bond with him. And God wants deeper connections. And so maybe you're connected to somebody through your school or through a hobby. Maybe you like basketball. And so he's building even deeper relationships. Say you find someone else that loves God, that also loves basketball, and you form a group. That bond is even a deeper connection. In chemistry, we understand that a triple bond is stronger as well as shorter than a double bond. And a double bond is stronger and shorter than a single bond. And so those close knit relationships are really key to us growing and being successful in life.
If you can have someone who, if you can relate with them in three ways, this is the
Yes.
best type of friendship.
Yeah. So let's say,
Okay. Wow. This is the first time we're hearing it. What about,
right.
would you say is the same for relationships? So do you think the
I
best
would
relationships you have to connect at least in three main, like important areas in life?
I would say the closer there's alignment there, the deeper the relationship you can have because there's a greater understanding. Now watch out now because the people you surround yourself with, you become like them. And so even if somebody checks all the boxes to say like I like basketball, they like basketball, I love God, they love God. Um, you also want to look at the fruit of their life because who you spend time with, like I think there's a saying, the five people you're closest to are what your life looks like.
Next section is precipitating.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about that part of the book.
Yeah, so precipitating matters of the heart is another chapter. This one is one of my personal favorites. So it's not what goes into a man that defiles him, but it's what comes out. And so, what you focus on, what you watch, say what you watch on TV or what music you listen to, it affects you. You may not realize consciously that it's affecting you, but it affects your thought patterns, right? And the way you see things. And so that can if you get angry or upset, sometimes that can come out and you may say things you don't mean to say, right? That could hurt somebody else. And you're like, oh, I didn't mean to say it, but it was bubbling up because you didn't deal with it. And so in reactions, precipitates form. It's like when the solution just cannot hold any more of a specific salt. Maybe it's a barely soluble thing. And so I talk about how, like, if you just let these things bubble up in you and you don't talk about it, right, then this can happen. So the solution to that is, if you have a problem, maybe with a classmate, or if you have a problem, it's okay to talk about it, and talk about it quickly so you don't stew, right, and it continue to be in your thoughts.
What are the negative outcomes for holding something, especially like a negative thought or emotion, for a really long time?
Well, depending on this particular circumstances and what it is, if we let our hearts get bitter, it can actually like cause long-term stress effects. So maybe your nervous system starts behaving wildly. Your hormones, something I've been reading about recently, like certain hormones may be imbalanced, which leads to other potential health issues. But stress, when it's not dealt with, because really that's relational stress, right? Holding that stuff in. If it's not dealt with in a healthy way, it can not only impact your relationships, but it can impact your health majorly. And so, especially as young people, it's good to learn those conflict resolution skills early so that you don't hold on to that stress and you just have a good outlet for it.
What would you say to people or Christians that are kind of against incorporating science into the curriculum?
Okay. So this is actually a post I'm going to make today. So this is very timely. It's important to remember that the Bible is not a science textbook. Understand the way an atom works, the way, or not the way it works, because it's always been the same, but the way we understand about atoms and molecules has changed a lot over the last 120 years. There's so many models you're taught about in general chemistry. This is how an atom was. Okay. The plum pudding model, all these things. And we know that's not how it works now because we have better tools to investigate. And so I would say, with regard to that, in science, it's ever changing because we're getting better tools to investigate. And we have limited knowledge because we didn't create the universe. Um, and so sometimes people try to force, like try to blend the two, right, with evolution and the Bible and force it. I don't do that. They're two separate things. Science is the study of creation, right? Created matter. And the Bible is God's word. And so it's God's love letter to us to tell us about him, and what he did for us. And it's not that you're reading for totally different purposes. And so that's what I would say there is they're two different things. And there's a lot we don't know. As a scientist, I know the more questions I ask and the more answers I get, the more I don't know, which should leave me in a very humble spot because I don't know how things work. The more evidence I have, the more I can be sure of it.
Actually talking to one of my students, like he was asking me, does God really exist? And I'm like, there has to be God, to orchestrate all of this weather, climate, planets. Like, no human is in charge. And even the best scientists don't have answers. But what would you say to people who thinks that God does not exist?
So the only self sufficient being in the entire universe is God. We can see from the design of snail shells, the geometry that it's designed. We are the only creatures on this planet, human beings are, right? We have souls. We can talk. We can communicate. Look at all the technology. God crowned humanity with his glory. And so I say this because there's some of the things in our universe, there's no way they could just accidentally happen. The probability of that is so infinitesimally small. Actually would take there's a book by someone called I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. And I think, it kind of speaks to the point of it. You could believe that somebody could believe there's no God, but that actually requires more faith than someday I believe I will meet the creator after I die. The Bible makes it clear, um, after you die, then you will meet God and everyone will be held accountable for what they've done and everything before him, right? Um, and so I think it actually would take more faith to believe there isn't a God and that all this happened just by coincidence. Because even somebody that says they don't believe, they're believing in something. Maybe they're believing in the Big Bang Theory, or maybe they're believing in something else. But we have beliefs, and those beliefs inform actions, and they inform what we do. It's just that we may not recognize it.
Next question is about young teenagers who don't enjoy science, specifically, probably more like chemistry and physics. These are extremely difficult, for us to break down and comprehend. I personally struggled with physics in high school.
Um, well, one thing to think about is that it's necessary for, I believe, about 50% of college students have to take either physics, chemistry, or biology, or more than 50, depending on your major. It's a requirement, but that's not why you should like it, right? The goal of a college education or education in general, especially high school, is to get you to be a well rounded citizen. They want you to be well rounded. And so you want to understand a little bit about a lot of things. And with that in mind, chemistry is there in your cooking class. Like if you love to bake, you may not actively be measuring out, like, okay, this reaction, but it's those principles that affect most of the products that we use every day. And so understanding like the why you have to do it can help, even if you don't specifically like that part, to kind of get through it. Really, for me, like understanding the why, like, why do I have to take English? And thinking about that, like, okay, now I understand why it's important. And so the why is really big. Um, the why is really big for anything you're doing. The more you can appreciate that part, even if you don't like maybe the mechanics of solving a chemistry equation or the math part of it, you can still do it and you can still appreciate it.
This question is for the teachers. How can teachers make science class interesting and appealing to the young learners?
So, one reason I think my books are so successful is because I'm interweaving analogies from science alongside teaching biblical truth. And so, if you can connect science or a science principle to something else that your audience can relate to, maybe a hobby or an interest that they have, they'll be able to understand it in a new way. Because then when you tell it in story form,
So for young teenagers who are learning science now and like they might not see the immediate benefits. Like, why am I learning this? I don't really need this in my life. Or I'm gonna be an accountant. Why do I need to learn physics? Or I'm gonna become a singer,
Mhm.
actor. Why do I need to have to take one of the SAT classes? I mean, science classes. Yes, being a well-rounded citizen is important, but what are some other benefits that you can use in, apply it in your real life?
Well, when we think about it, for example, our laptop, the laptop you're using, the technology there, someone had to develop it. And they developed it because of the material science and the chemistry principles, right? Using those to develop better. So, in that sense, we can really, there's a reason chemistry is often called the central science because really chemistry is applied physics and physics is applied math. And so there's an order. You can appreciate it by seeing there's an order to everything. And regardless of what your profession is or you planning to be, math is a must, right? Because we all have to balance a budget. We all have to pay our taxes, right? We all have to do certain things. And some of these, maybe the chemistry part itself, you might not find application, but a lot of chemistry and physics in high school is algebra. And you need those algebra skills for whatever career path. Maybe you're trying to figure out how much inventory you need or how much profit you can make from a business owner. You still need the algebra.
I'm not sure like what year. I think on our side in Asia, STEM became quite popular. 15 years ago, 15 years ago. Before that, when we were young, STEM was not a big thing in Asia. So, do you know why? What the shift kind of was that educators started incorporating STEM more in primary schools, and why did they, understand the importance of like we need to start from grade one and not just in middle school?
So in the last 10 years, technology continues to increase very rapidly. And there's an increased need for a workforce that understands all the different facets. I think they've started younger because they realize perhaps that retention is better at an early age. There have been some studies, I forget the exact statistics, but if you teach a child a second language early, then they'll remember more of it. So, kind of a similar principle because if you think about it, all the sciences are languages. There are different ways, philosophies, right? There are different ways of thinking. And so, by starting early, you're building more of that foundation. So, then the more advanced knowledge can be laid on top of it.
And what is your one last message?
Yeah, so I want to encourage you, that you have a specific purpose and calling. Mine has to do with science education. Um, and if you don't know what that is or you need help, I've provided a copy of my book for you from the link. It's a PDF of it. So feel free to take a look at that. And then my new book, sorry, my new book will be launching in January. There we go.
We're gonna add all of the details and links in the description. Make sure to check it out. And I hope you like science from this video. I hope you found this video insightful and helpful. See you in my next video, just like these.